Tasha Richardson, process number 5, midterm ASL to English. And Amy says, okay, so once we've finished talking about puberty and the concept of it, so now I really want to focus on social emotions. And I know many of you remember that time very well. So teenage years is the toughest time or toughest period in a person's life. It's even worse than a midlife crisis. And there are age problems as well. But we're really wondering, why do teenagers have such a hard time of it? And I really want to explain that. Okay. Well, do you remember growing up when you were about anywhere from birth to 5? You loved being with your family. You felt a strong connection with your mother. Around 2, 3, or 4, you start noticing people tell you no. No, no, no. You say, I want, I want, me. And then to 6, 7, or 8, you start learning how to share. You learn how to play with people or with other children. Start learning rules, be nice to your friends. Maybe you have a favorite toy, you're like, it's mine. I don't want to share. You learn that sometimes you have to share, you have to be willing. And if they break it, you can't get mad and hit them. So you really have to learn how to control your emotions. And that's what children do. They learn self-control. But in the middle of your age, the middle of your development, they develop something that the interpreter missed. So this is really an ability to look at different perspectives in different situations. And so that really overcomes, and it really overcomes something, and it's critical thinking. It's ability to look at things from different perspectives and how to solve problems using this skill. So during your middle ages, you're going to have lots of conflicts pop up. Maybe someone's gossiping about me. Kids learn how to approach and solve problems, like gossiping. And this is really trying to develop friendships. And it's identifying, who is my social group? Who do I identify as? And this also helps to develop strong bonds. And then in high school, you really feel connected and a deep bond with your friends. And that's really a part of your self-identity. And it's really connected to what you like and what you don't like. And this is because you've already been within several different social groups. Maybe you've disconnected from some and finally found your niche. And that's how you self-identify from there on out. So, the younger you are, the more you experience different types of social groups and different types of conflicts. So I want you to really sit and look back to high school. I want you to think of sitting in that high school cafeteria. You remember where you used to sit. You remember with which group. Maybe sometimes you noticed that in the cafeteria, when all the students would congregate, right in the middle of the cafeteria area is typically the athletes. The cool kids, right? That's the cool kid area. And then maybe over there in the corners, you have different groups. Maybe they identify with the way they dress. Or maybe they all think the same in that certain social group. Maybe they all have the same interests. Maybe they love computer or math. The geeks. Or the nerds, the nerdy group. Or maybe you have the fashion risks or gang members, and those are definitely groups as well. So I really want to go into different types of peer groups. And if you look here on the board, I have it written down. So the first group is influencers. So I want to really go into what that means. So they're more of an elite or snobby group. They're usually the quarterback. Maybe they play the varsity team or cheerleaders. And understand that it's not always that specific group that is the influencers at that school. You know, maybe there's fashionistas where they copy styles from magazines and they show up in school with snazzy dress clothes on, and so that also influences the way other students dress. So what other groups? Let's see here. The conformists. The conformists tend to follow the influencers. They want to be like them. They tend to compare themselves with them. And a lot of times they can feel like they're never good enough. This can be very frustrating. So they really look up to that influencing group. They want to be a part of that group. They want to identify as a member of that group. Then we have the pacifists. So I really want you to be careful how you interpret the word pacifist. It doesn't mean that they just sit back and accept. It really means that they're not involved, that they feel separate from groups. They don't want to be identified as an influencer or a conformist. They are separate from this. It really means that they refuse to conform. They don't want to dress like everybody else. They really don't care how they're dressed. They don't care if they look geeky. It's not important. That group actually tends to have a higher rate of success. And it's usually because they have more energy focused towards their studying. They're not focused on how they're dressed. And they actually have some pretty interesting social skills compared to the first two groups. They usually don't have actually as strong as social skills. They do, however, tend to have higher variety of interests. And so the last group that I want to discuss is right over here, and it's called the edgers. So that group, they love to be polar opposites of everybody else. They love to disagree. Now, I want you to keep in mind they are also influencers as well, but they love that shock value. They can also be rebels, rebelling against society. I don't know if you've ever seen goth kids, but they fit into this group, with the crazy black makeup and the black nails and the metal everywhere. They love Marilyn Manson. Those kinds of kids, they're polar opposites of what's the norm, but they're still strong influencers. Maybe they have crazy piercings or mohawk. They want attention to be on them. And so they're, what's it called? Oh my goodness. Extreme sports, that's it. Like snowboarding, where they do some crazy tricks and flips. So there's those different kinds of groups. So we have those 4 different kinds of groups that kids tend to identify as. So the last one, the edgers, they usually get picked on the most. So I want you to remember and look back to the Columbine school when there was those 2 boys that were rebels and they got picked on. They didn't have high self-esteem. And so that really depends, self-esteem really depends on family support and if your peer groups accept you. And the influencers are, they can actually not always, let me rephrase that. The influencers don't necessarily have to be a good group or influence good decisions. They can influence smoking weed or getting into trouble. So really each group has some strengths and they have some weaknesses. They each group has both. It's not all one group is good and one group is bad. So I want you to look at these four groups. Where do you think a deaf person would fit in? Yes, what about you? And this gentleman in the striped sweater says, I don't really feel like I connect with any of those groups. So I want to know how something is influenced in each of these groups. The interpreter missed the exact phrasing. So and Amy says, out of these four groups, the identities that I'm giving you are pretty general within that group. They each have their own culture. And so for in the example, in the cafeteria, maybe there's an artistic group. Maybe there's an African American group. They're both influencers. So if you have a group of two different sets of races, they usually tend to be separated and they're both influencers. But let's say for the majority, I'm sorry, the interpreter misinterpreted that. It's the minority. The minority can be edgers. It depends on how the person identifies themselves. That's a really great question, though.